On Dragonstar Island, a girl once died because she turned her head too quickly. She wasn't a traitor. She wasn't dangerous. She just forgot the rule. On this island, even breathing wrong could cost you everything. They called it paradise. A place where emperors rested, where the richest men of Asia sipped wine under moonlight, surrounded by flowers and silk. But for the girls brought here, it was a prison with no bars, where rules were written in whispers. And the punishment for forgetting was silence, permanent, unmarked silence. Her name was Han 16. She once sold rice paper lanterns on a corner street in Guangzhou. Until one day, men in black robes came with a letter marked by a red seal. Your daughter has been honored with selection to Dragonstar Island. Honor? It was the price of a coffin for her sick mother. The cost of one more bottle of medicine for her baby brother. 20 silver coins. And a one-way ship to somewhere not even maps dared name. The moment she stepped off the boat, her name was taken. She was no longer Han, you are now Tian Mok, they told her. Gift of heaven. You belong to him now. Her hair was cut. Her back was washed with freezing water. And a silk ribbon was tied around her neck. Not tight enough to choke, but tight enough to remind her she couldn't leave. She was placed in a minor palace, one of many small chambers where girls were trained in silence, posture, breath control, and most importantly, how not to exist. The very first lesson wasn't how to speak or bow. It was this: never turn your back. She thought it was a metaphor. Until the third night, a girl named Lan Ni dropped her comb during tea practice. It slid across the floor. She turned quickly, too quickly, to pick it up. That was all. By morning, her bedding was gone. So were her slippers. Only a white orchid was placed on the windowsill, dried, broken at the stem. No one asked. No one spoke. That was the second rule. Never mention what's been erased. A week later, Tian Mok was chosen to serve wine at the White Jade Terrace, a private hall where the Supreme Lord dined. She walked carefully, like she was floating, just as taught. Then it happened. Bring me the perfumed sachet, he said. It was behind her. Her hands froze. No one helped. And in a single, silent second, she turned. He didn't speak. He didn't look at her. Just 3 fingers tapping the marble railing. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound was soft, like raindrops on stone. But her heart dropped into her stomach. That night, they brought a black velvet box to her room. Inside, a mirror, a silk rope, and 2 glass rods. By morning, the attendant whispered, you must learn to move without ever revealing your back, or vanish like the girl before you. All night, she practiced in silence, moving like smoke, like silk across wind. No knees, no spine, no sound. By dawn, her feet bled, but her reflection no longer showed fear, only obedience. And for the first time, she forgot what breathing freely felt like. That night, she learned to turn without turning. But the next morning, she lost something deeper, her ability to say, I. They called it the Chamber of Pure Speech. It was a narrow hall lined with mirrors, where the ceiling was too low to stand tall and too narrow to stretch your arms without hitting someone else's shadow. Here, speech wasn't taught, it was scrubbed. Every word suggesting identity, desire, or opinion was forbidden. You are not a person, the supervisor said. You are a vessel. You will speak only in terms worthy of him. His name was Supervisor Tin Ka. An aging man with white fingernails and a voice like broken porcelain. He never blinked or raised his tone. But when a girl spoke incorrectly, he simply reached for the long bamboo cane hanging from the incense rack. They stood in rows, barefoot on salt-covered tiles. Repeat, he ordered. This humble concubine awaits correction. This lowly body has no will. This servant offers no thought. Hours passed. The salt burned through their skin, but no one cried. Crying would be a violation of self. And violations meant more than just pain. One young, soft-voiced girl dared to say, I didn't understand. Crack. The cane landed across her open palms. There is no I here, Tin Ka whispered. Try again. Bleed, if needed. But do not remember who you were. She was forced to copy the correct phrase, written in ink mixed with ox blood, 200 times on red parchment. By the 73rd repetition, she collapsed. No one helped her up. At first, Tian Mok resisted in her mind. I think I should keep breathing slowly. I want to sleep for 1 more hour. But after 3 weeks, I vanished. Not just in speech, but in thought. Even in dreams, she referred to herself as this body, this presence, this offering. It terrified her, but she couldn't stop. Every time she said something correct, the salt under her feet was swept away. That was the only reward, a moment of comfort. Her roommate, Mai Yin, once whispered to her at night, "Do you ever think of your old name?" Mine was Yin. My mother used to call me Little Firefly. That was the first and last time she spoke it. The next morning, Mai Yin's bed was empty. Her scent was gone. Her sandals were burned in the garden fire pit. Under her mattress, Tien Mok found a note scratched into silk thread. "I am real, but no one is allowed to let me be." After that, Tien Mok stopped resisting. She no longer used "I" in her head, no longer flinched when her name didn't appear on the attendance slate, and no longer dreamed of Guangzhou, mooncakes, or her baby brother's fevered breaths. She became what they wanted, a blank mask wearing silk, a voice that spoke only in bows and borrowed phrases. One night, while sweeping the inner corridor, she saw a reflection in the polished wall, a girl in white, eyes dim, spine straight. She stared and realized it was her. She hadn't cried in weeks. She hadn't laughed in months. And she couldn't remember the sound of her own voice. They said eyes were the window to the soul. But on Dragonstar Island, if you let your soul be seen, they would erase it. Rule 1, never turn your back. Rule 2, never say I. Now came Rule 3, never be seen. But how do you serve a man who demands obedience, yet punishes recognition? How do you become invisible in a palace made entirely of mirrors? Before every formal appearance, the attendants reminded them, eyes down. No direct gaze. No emotion. Tien Mok learned to fix her vision just beneath the collarbone, never the eyes. She trained her pupils to flicker like candlelight, focused but hollow. One night, Royal Attendant Cam told her, "To see is to connect, and the Supreme Lord does not permit connection, only control." It happened during the incense cleansing ritual. 30 palace girls, dressed in pale green, stood in perfect symmetry, hands clasped, eyes down, around the water pavilion terrace. The Supreme Lord passed, bare feet, crimson robe, a breeze of sandalwood trailing behind him. Then one girl looked up. Non Vu. It was just a moment. A flicker of fear, curiosity, or maybe recognition. Their eyes met, and that was it. He didn't shout. He didn't scold. He merely tilted his head, ever so slightly. That night, Non Vu was summoned. She never returned to the minor palaces. The next morning, she reappeared in the Soul Guiding District, where mute eunuchs and failed ritual girls were assigned to clean halls no one visited. Her eyes remained open, but they no longer blinked, no longer moved. Severing the spiritual light, they called it. Tien Mok passed her later that week, sweeping the outer court. Their shoulders brushed. Non Vu didn't flinch. She just kept moving, as if her soul had been folded up and packed away. Not dead, not alive, just removed. That night, Tien Mok covered every mirror in her room with cloth. She whispered no prayers. She did not cry, but she did one thing. She sat for hours practicing how to see without seeing, how to blur her vision without blinking, how to mimic attention without holding meaning. She trained her gaze to hover, not on people, but on walls, fabrics, the air between two breaths. Then came the incident. She was changing incense in the east chamber when he entered, unannounced. She startled, the tray in her hands tilting slightly. In that sliver of fear, her head turned. Her eyes rose. They locked for less than a second. But it was too late. He didn't strike her, didn't call the guards, didn't say a word. He just smiled. A slow, knowing, terrifying curve of the lips. "You just saw something," he said, "that no one is allowed to see." She dropped to the floor, forehead to marble, whispering, "This body begs forgiveness. Please erase the memory. Please unsee what was seen." That night, she was taken to the quiet dream chamber. A soundless place. Walls padded with woven silk. Incense thick like fog. They said this was where the soul's windows were cleansed. 3 days she lay there, breathing shallow, while a low-toned bell rang every 7 minutes, forcing her into waking sleep. When she emerged, she spoke less, smiled less, and never again looked above a man's knees. She had learned something deeper than language or posture. She had learned to disappear her soul. Because on Dragonstar Island, to be seen was to be hunted. If a voice is proof of being alive, then Dragonstar trained them to die without dying. Silence wasn't peace. It was control. At the Moonlight Palace, the deepest wing of Dragonstar, no sound was allowed unless requested. Not a breath, not a sigh, not even the soft flutter of silk brushing skin. It was the site of the Supreme Lord's most sacred ritual, The Dragon Intercourse Ceremony. Tian Mok was summoned on a fog-heavy night. The palace glowed with translucent jade tiles, casting ghost light over the silence. Before entering, attendant Cam whispered, "Do not speak. Do not cry. Do not breathe too loudly. Your body exists only to serve, without disrupting the air. No instructions beyond that. Just silence and expectation." She stepped inside. The chamber smelled of orchid oil and cold incense. A bed carved from black stone. A single brazier glowing faintly, not for warmth, but to cast flickering shadows. Then he entered, barefoot, wearing no crown, no titles, only eyes that demanded erasure. He didn't touch her gently. He didn't demand affection. He demanded absence. No gasp, no wince, no sob. Even her heartbeat had to be tamed, for the rhythm of resistance was considered rebellion. Tian Mok did what she had never done before. She abandoned herself. She recited a childhood poem in her head, pictured lotus petals floating downriver, counted every imagined drop of rain on the roof. Not to escape, but to survive. She disconnected from her own skin. She blurred her pain with pattern. She sang silently, just to muffle thought. By the time it ended, she couldn't feel her fingers. And that was good. That meant she had passed. Some didn't pass. There was a girl once, Thursday Mai. She wept during the ritual. Not loudly. Just 3 silent tears that touched the dragon mat. The next morning, she was taken to the Qi chamber, a place no one described, only whispered about. They say, Cam murmured once, the Qi chamber removes not memory, but reaction. Thursday Mai returned weeks later. She could still walk, still pour tea, still bow. But when someone accidentally dropped a tray near her, she didn't blink, just stood, still, like silence made flesh. Tian Mok was summoned again, and again. Each time, she returned quieter. Her eyes blinked slower. Her footsteps made no sound. She began sleeping with her lips slightly parted, so as not to clench her jaw even in dreams. At night, she wrapped her own arms in silk, tight, to prevent unconscious movement. Because even in sleep, a twitch was evidence of a self. And selves were not allowed. The Supreme Lord favored her now. Not because she was beautiful, not because she was obedient, but because she wasn't there. He said once, "You move like a thoughtless prayer. That pleases me." She bowed. Of course. But deep down, she realized. He didn't want affection. He didn't even want worship. He wanted to see if he could erase someone so completely, they would become his echo. She no longer sang, no longer hummed when washing, no longer sighed when the wind slipped through the corridor. Silence wrapped around her like a second skin, and she feared breaking it, not because of punishment, but because she no longer remembered how to sound human. On Dragonstar Island, pregnancy isn't hope. It's proof. Proof that you still exist. And for that, they may kill you. 6 times she was summoned to the Moonlight Palace. 6 times she returned quieter, smaller, further from herself. Until the nausea began. Not violent, just enough to dull her breath. Then came the dizziness. The way lotus oil made her gag. The delay in her cycle. There was no misunderstanding. If suspected of pregnancy and not reported within 3 days, death. If falsely reported, 30 lashes and a burn mark behind the neck. So whether you were sure or not, you had to choose, confess and risk being branded. Stay silent and risk disappearing. Tian Mok chose to report. But not because she hoped to live, only because she feared vanishing without even a rumor. She entered the hall of internal discipline. Bowed. Whispered, "This humble vessel may carry the Supreme Lord's sacred essence." Chief Eunuch Du Nin didn't react. He simply dipped his brush in red ink, wrote 1 character on silk, "Observe," then gestured. 2 masked attendants approached. She followed them, not to the infirmary, not to the garden, to the wind-soothing, moon-nourishing pavilion. It wasn't a chamber. It was a cell, disguised with white silk walls and perfumed air. No windows, no clocks, no words, just her, and time, and a body that might, or might not, betray her. Each meal was weighed to the gram, each bowl examined afterward, each excretion monitored for signs of vitality. She stayed there 12 days, 12 silent sunrises, unseen, 12 nights of thinking. If it's true, will I be erased before I even bleed? On the 13th day, a female physician arrived, gray-robed, thin hands, bare feet. She touched Tian Mok's wrist, waited, then shook her head, once. Not pregnant. No words were exchanged. No comfort. No relief, just silence. In the arrival of the whip, 12 lashes, each laid with surgical precision down her back, curved like the dragon leaf seal. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't even flinch, because any sound would have been guilt. When they finished, she was handed a basin of herbal water and told, "Be grateful. He still favors you." She bowed and bled and returned. From that day on, the scar between her shoulder blades burned every time she breathed deeply. She began charting her own body like a scientist observing a foreign organism. Temperature, mood, color of nails, strength of breath, type of hunger. Not for healing, not for control, but to know the next time she might be condemned by biology. Nok Lin, the girl from the Highlands, wasn't so lucky. She delayed reporting. Too scared, too hopeful. By the time she confessed, her belly had already betrayed her. 3 days later, she vanished. The official record read, "Attempt to conceal divine lineage." Her chamber was scrubbed, her name removed from all schedules. Even her bedding was burned. Tien Mok never allowed herself that kind of hope again. She stitched a cloth journal, not with ink, but with fine threads, a secret tracker she wore folded in her inner robe. Each symbol meant something only she knew. A triangle, nausea. A cross, pain. A circle, blood. It wasn't for escape or rebellion. It was to stay alive in a place where life itself was a sin. There was no word for mother in the Dragonstar dialect. Only host, only vessel. To carry life was not a blessing. It was a biological betrayal. Because in a system built to erase identity, to carry another heartbeat was an act of war. And the price for war was always silence. Trust is the final luxury. And in Dragonstar, it's always a trap. She thought Tu Huyen was different. They weren't close, but there was a gentleness in her eyes, a softness rare in a palace of masks and mirrors. They once shared a blanket during fever season, once laughed about how snow in Dragonstar was actually crushed pearl flakes sprinkled on the balcony, once shared silence in a way that felt safe. And in a world where silence meant fear, that safety was everything. But one night, they were both summoned. The two-flower ceremony, a ritual of harmonic service, when two women were selected to balance the Supreme Lord's energy. One would lead, the other would follow. Neither was told which role was theirs. They were both dressed in red silk robes, hair adorned with wooden pins, one painted with flame, one with water. The symbolism was clear, only one could burn. In the chamber of intertwined hearts, the air was heavy with sandalwood. As the music began, soft, slow, cruel, Tu Huyen took a step forward. No eye contact, no permission. She simply assumed the lead. Every gesture rehearsed, every movement polished. She had prepared. Without ever telling Tien Mok, Tien Mok followed. Stiff, silent, not out of obedience, but out of shock. She had no script, no rhythm. She was no longer a performer, just a silhouette, chasing someone else's survival. The next morning, Tu Huyen's name was called at dawn. She was relocated to the favor quarters. A silk banner hung over her door, Huyen Phi, concubine of favor. And on her table, a wooden comb, identical to Tien Mok's, except this one was inlaid with gold and engraved with the words, "Chosen." Tien Mok was neither punished nor rewarded. She was kept, cleaned, returned to routine. But she understood something new. Trust is not broken in screams. It's broken in silence. That night, she didn't cry, didn't dream, didn't sleep, just sat, staring at her hand. The same hand Tu Huyen once held under the blanket. The same hand now clenched so tight her fingernails drew blood. After that, she no longer slept beside anyone, no longer shared food, no longer whispered at night. She erased even the idea of softness. Her smile became fixed, measured, precise. Her bows were perfect, mechanical, without the hint of presence. She began walking slower, not out of weakness, but calculation, like someone who no longer feared death, only error. Weeks later, she saw Tu Huyen again, now draped in phoenix embroidery, eyes lined in gold. At the spring banquet, she walked behind the Supreme Lord, steps light, voice sweet. But when their eyes briefly met, there was nothing there. No guilt, no recognition, only a void so deep Tien Mok could almost hear it echo. That night, Tien Mok returned to her chamber, sat down, took her old comb, broke it, splintered it into 7 sharp slivers, wrapped them in cloth, tucked them under the floorboard, not as weapons, but as proof. proof that something inside her still had an edge. She whispered, for the first time in months, "There are no friends here. Only witnesses waiting to become enemies." Then, silence again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was readiness. Some rules aren't written on paper. They're etched into silence. And innocence breaks them all. It had been over a year since Tien Mok arrived on Dragonstar. She no longer whispered, no longer dreamed. Even her name, Han, had faded to the corners of memory, like the taste of sweet soup after too many winters. Until Milo arrived. She was barely 14. Big, round eyes. Skin not yet dulled by incense smoke. She entered the dorm with trembling steps, clutching a small bundle wrapped in cotton cloth. Inside was nothing special, just a brush, a broken mirror, and a wooden figurine shaped like a crane. When she saw Tien Mok, she bowed awkwardly, then whispered, "What's your name, sister? Do you miss home? Do they let us write letters here?" 3 questions, all forbidden, but not cruel, just untainted. Tien Mok didn't answer. She handed Milo the purple silk sleeping robe, the same one she had once worn on her first night here. But she didn't speak, because speaking meant remembering, and remembering meant pain. That night, for the first time in months, Tien Mok dreamed. In the dream, she stood before a mirror, not in silk, not with hairpins, just herself, bare, blinking, uncertain. And behind her, a young girl smiled gently. Han, not Tien Mok, the girl who once knew stories, who wanted to be a teacher, who once believed kindness could be enough. When she woke, her hand was on her chest, feeling for a heartbeat she thought she'd buried long ago. In the days that followed, Tien Mok was assigned to guide Milo. It was her duty to teach her how to walk, how to bow, how to exist without being. But something shifted. She taught slower, more carefully, with a tenderness she didn't remember possessing. When Milo stumbled, she didn't flinch or scold. She caught her, but danger in Dragonstar doesn't come with knives. It comes with emotion, and innocence is the deadliest form of rebellion. One evening, Milo whispered again, "Sister, why don't you smile with your eyes? If we're all serving the same Lord, why are we so scared all the time?" Tien Mok froze. Those questions weren't just naive. They were forbidden thoughts. Questions had weight here, enough to crush both the one who asked and the one who listened. That night, Tien Mok sat in silence long after curfew. She pulled out a hairpin, one of her last personal items, and carved one word into its underside, "Lo." Then she slipped it into Milo's pillow before sunrise. A reminder, a message, a secret whisper, do not forget who you are, even if no one says your name out loud. But from that day on, every glance from an attendant, every unexpected knock on the door, every passing shadow, felt heavier. Because now, Tien Mok wasn't just surviving. She was protecting. And protection meant sacrifice. When Milo asked again about home, Tien Mok didn't answer. But she did something far more dangerous. She reached out, tucked a stray hair behind the girl's ear, and whispered, "If you still remember your name after your second year, run." Not loud, not emotional, just a seed planted in the dark. On Dragonstar, dreams were dangerous. Names were weapons. And innocence was a spark. But sometimes, a spark was all you needed to set fire to a palace made of silence. In Dragonstar, fire was forbidden, because it reminded people they could still burn. For months, Tien Mok had survived by forgetting, by obeying, by becoming no one. But innocence doesn't stay quiet. And Milo wasn't fading. She asked too many questions, smiled too brightly, carried hope like it was allowed. And hope was the most dangerous contraband in the palace. One evening, a royal attendant arrived without notice. She called only one name, Lo. Milo froze. The robe slipped from her hands. Her eyes searched Tien Mok's. No explanation, no farewell, only a glance, as if asking, "Did I do something wrong by staying myself?" Then she was gone. Tien Mok didn't cry. She sat by the incense burner for hours that night. Then, for the first time in over a year, she reached under the floorboard, pulled out the wooden comb she once broke into 7 pieces. She reassembled it, bound it with silk string, and carved one word into the handle, and her real name. She was no longer afraid of remembering it. At dawn, she slipped into the chamber of silent wind, where forbidden documents were burned weekly. No guards at that hour, only smoke and cinders. She stood alone, held a silk cloth embroidered with her name, and whispered, "If I cannot live as Han, I will burn as her." and she set the cloth on fire, not to destroy it, but to let the wind carry what the palace tried to erase. The next night, she did something no one dared. She entered the records room. Disguised as a shadow maid, she sifted through archives, found a scroll sealed with red wax, Pregnancy File 12A. Milo's name was on it, marked for removal, labeled emotionally unstable, scheduled for realignment. There was still time, if she acted now. On the night of the Lotus Eclipse Festival, when every attendant drank ceremonial wine, Tian Mok struck. She laced the incense in the upper corridors with crushed moon orchid. It wouldn't kill, just blur memories for a while. She slipped into the chi chamber disguised as a mute nursemaid. Found Milo, alive but sedated, eyes blank, body trembling. Tian Mok whispered, "Wake up. Say your name." Nothing. She cupped the girl's cheeks, leaned close. "Say your name." A beat, then a whisper, "My Lo." They escaped through the garden of ghost pines, where the dead concubine's ashes were scattered. No one guarded it. No one ever returned from there. Because returning wasn't the point. It was the only way out. But halfway across the bridge, a gong rang. Someone had noticed. Tian Mok turned, shielding Milo with her body. Footsteps closed in. She handed the girl the broken comb, said one word, "Run," and stepped back. She faced the guards with a calm bow. Spoke clearly, "This body has broken all rules. Let it be cleansed." They seized her, dragged her back inside. But not before she saw, just for a moment, Milo disappear into the fog beyond the wall. No one ever saw Tian Mok again. Some said she was sent to the chamber of drowning light. Others believed she was silenced, but not destroyed. Because weeks later, a white lotus bloomed in the garden of ghost pines, out of season, impossible. Tied to its stem was a red thread wrapped around a name, Han.